Ramki, thank you so much for joining me. So, I'm looking at the latest Consumer Connections 2025 report. And one of the things that you're doing this time, which is different seemingly, is your cluster approach, where you've defined things by affluent class, urban, middle, masses, and rural. So, before I come to what you found in that cluster approach, so tell us broadly why you've decided to go for this approach.
So the fundamental reason is what I would simply put in one word as de-averaging. Averages tend to mask a lot of realities. I mean, when you look at an average growth of this FMCG category, India is not one country. It's a bunch of countries rolled into one. So to that extent, it's difficult to paint one single picture of India altogether. So therefore, we say that we have to start looking at it as clusters within India and see, are there opportunities for growth? Why should we look at a complete picture where we're saying the growth is slowing down? Can we look at opportunities for growth? And these opportunities for growth may not merely be geographic in nature. It's not just north, south, east, west. It can even be by the class of people that we're addressing. It can be by the class of towns that they live in. So we broke India into multiple sectors like this and saw where there are opportunities for growth and what are some of the trends that we are able to see. That's the whole purpose of de-averaging India to find details and pockets of growth.
And this is this a radical departure from the past, or a sort of minor departure from the past and the previous ways methodologies of assessment?
No, it's actually not a departure at all, if you ask me. It is just a newer way of looking at it with little more microscopic in terms of eyes, granularity, looking at it with granularity. I won't say it's a departure. There are some organizations which do this in their own way. But is there a way in which we can look at the whole of FMCG like this? That's the only reason why we try to do this.
And I mean, just another sort of allied question. What is it that you felt you were clearly missing in previous approaches as opposed to this one?
Yeah, so one thing that was missing was the pockets of growth vary not only on the basis of geography, not only on the basis of town class, but also on types of category. So what is a growth trajectory for one category in one particular cluster need not reflect in other categories. So therefore, each cluster has to be looked at by each category to see where are their growth. So that is what perhaps was missed earlier. So you tend to look at South as a big market and let's go South. Rather than that, can it be South, million plus towns? Among these audience seems to be a big market. So today's media allows you to sharp focus on these people as well. So that allows you, this kind of a look allows you to measure the impact of the investments or the promotions or whatever you have done in terms of marketing actions around these particular target groups.
Right. So tell us about the findings from this latest round, that's the 2025, and the affluent class versus urban, middle, masses, and rural. So what's standing out, and what are the categories that are doing differently as you're approaching it now in this form?
So what it definitely tells me is something about rural. In terms of rural, if you see, we have made a comparison of two different time points, 2021 and 2025. And we see that even categories which can be distinctly classified as discretionary have shown a sharp increase in terms of their penetration. And this includes things like liquid fabric wash, juices, insecticides, feminine hygiene products, all of them showing penetration increases fairly significantly. Of these, feminine hygiene I would attribute to some extent to a lot of government action in terms of promotion of feminine hygiene, etc. But rest of the categories, juices, for example, or let's say fabric conditioners, for example, can be clearly classified as discretionary, right? And these 4-year period of 21 to 25 have seen as many uncertainties that you can ask for as are there. Like there have been inflationary periods, there have been hyperinflationary periods, and there have been cool down periods. But despite all of that, the penetration is growing. So therefore, there is a distinct need and propensity to consume in the rural consumer. All that requires is an enabling of that. And that enabling seems to come through pack sizes at this moment. There could be others that need to be explored. So that is one big thing that we learned from this. Second thing that we notice is that convenience as a vector of growth seems to be all pervading, whether it's affluent or masses, urban or rural. Everywhere we see convenience as an angle that is really, really showing a sharp levels of growth. Now, the extent to which this drives growth can vary depending upon which particular cluster you're addressing. But as a single vector, if you ask for one thing that grows across, it seems to be convenience. So that's why you see convenience foods growing, convenience products, including the liquefaction of some of the personal care products and home care products. All of those are on the top of this angle called convenience. So all we are saying is don't just look at it as what we have indicated as clusters. There could be cluster suggestions from you, from the media, from clients, and we can look at any which way and cut India and look at the data in a different way than we have done before.
Right. And if I were to say the top line from trying to now understand how the consumer products industry has done in the last year and maybe this year calendar,
Mm.
what would you say are the takeaways? I mean, one thing that you see is that's highlighted is clearly volume growth that's slowing down.
Yes. Okay. Volume growth has slowed down, yes, but the value growth is sharply increased. So to that extent, what's happening is that is a reflection of price increases, inflation, and all of those things. So that is definitely happening. At the same time, if you, like I said earlier, if you're able to cluster it down into various groups, you are seeing pockets of growth even in volume in specific categories in specific markets. So therefore, it's very difficult for me to encompass that into a 2-minute statement. But if you look at that whole deck, it gives you a complete picture of where the growth is. Yeah.
Okay. And can you build on that a little more? When what kind of categories have seen volume going down and which ones have gone up?
Okay. So if you look at the broad consumer FMCG basket, it is heavily led by food, right? And food is where the growth is not sufficient. Personal care continues to grow, 7-8%. Home care continues to grow. In fact, home care faster, in fact. So those are categories where marketeer actions, packaging actions, promotion actions, pricing actions, or even content actions are causing a meaningful difference in terms of consumption and consumption behavior. Food is where there seems to be some level of pressure, especially for the listed companies, so to speak. I mean, if you read the commentary or if you've heard the commentary of companies around their quarterly performances, they tend to keep talking about an urban tightness. But if you look at it a little closer, there is urban tightness for the listed companies, but there is no urban tightness for the urban consumer, which means that there is a certain level of trading down which is happening, which is from the listed companies to a local brand or a local brand to even unbranded. In any case, in India, is always going to be a combination of branded, unbranded, and small brands, right? So this balance keeps changing depending upon how the food inflation moves or how any of the other indices move. So from that point of view, urban tightness is not that much of an issue that there is, because there is consumption. It is the action from the marketers which needs to move them up from being unbranded to branded or from small brands to the bigger brands. That's the action that is required.
But and you're saying food is what is shifting the needle, so to speak, or moving the needle when it comes to large consumer product companies. I mean, obviously they all have high food portfolios
Yes.
or presence of food in their portfolio.
Yes.
So if it were not to be food, you're saying things would have been different.
Yeah, if it is not food, the growth rates are higher. I mean, if you look at personal care or home care, definitely it is higher. And even within foods, if you see, it is the staples which are growing lesser, right? So that's where the issue is. So if you look at, let's say, salty snacks, there is still growth. Biscuits, there is marginal but growth. If you look at chocolates, there is growth. But if you look at beverages, there is growth, though people may complain of a truncated summer this year, but there is definitely growth in beverages as well. But staples is where there seems to be an issue, which means shifting down between branded, unbranded versus all of those things. Yeah.
So I'm going to come to what all of this means in your understanding of the Indian consumer and what the consumer is has been doing and is likely to do. The other thing I noticed was that you've talked about how the affluent class, which is 3%, is also spending. Is spending on essentials, but within essentials, it buys premium essentials. Now, I'm sure this has been happening for a couple of years, but can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so everyone spends on essentials. That is why they are called essentials, right? So everyone has to spend on essentials. So from that point of view, if it's affluent, what happens is it goes to the branded essentials and the branded formats among essentials. And if you just look at what would you call as a laundry product is an essential product. So if you look at that, the consumption in the affluent class seems to be the more liquid formats of that, or formats which are more convenient for machine use and etc. So that is what is getting indicated by that affluent class. Is that percolating down? Yes, it is percolating down. Is it percolating fast enough? It can be faster than this, because the liquefaction is as a trend or tendency was seen much more in Southeast Asia than it is seen in India. But it will certainly happen. But it's a question of how this gets balanced in the overall basket. I mean, in the sense, like for example, telecom went through a significant price increase in India, and that price increase did impact the extent to which consumers are willing to experiment with FMCG. I mean, it might seem like two diverse categories, but the wallet is the same, right? From the wallet, if it goes to something else, that affects this. That does not happen in the affluent class, which is why you're seeing more of the experimentation. So, which is why it's always going to be a dichotomy or a polarized sort of behavior for organizations. A company that is purely focused on premium, there is no issue. You just have to drive more and more growth around that and keep interesting those consumers. But if a company has has a mass plus premium, it has the twin task of driving that premium further and at the same time holding on to that core volume. And the core volume seems to be dropping in price, or to that extent, therefore, the price management. So what you lose in terms of holding on to pricing and driving volumes has to be compensated by premium. So that seems to be the big challenge encompassing large organizations which are straddling across segments in India.
Right. Another thing that I mean, insight that I thought was interesting is the urban middle, which is upgrading to new formats. Could you tell us a little more on that?
We spoke about that, which is the liquid formats, etc., and also even in terms of snacking and all of the newer introductions, which are things like, let's say, the Korean noodles or the Korean spice in terms of salty snacks, and biscuits in the form of Bisc Cafe and things like that. Those are the formats that are getting tried on. I mean, there is one part of the report which talks about out of home, right? So if you look at the out of home consumption, uh, out of home tends to be a kind of bellwether for food products. If you start consuming something more out of home, it will ultimately find its way inside the home as well. So if you look at the growth, the incremental volume, a very, very large part of the incremental volume in out of home consumption seems to come from new launches, right? So it highlights or underscores the need for new launches. In fact, it's as much as 100% in chocolates and as much as about 80% in salty snacks. So therefore, that many launches. Compare that to biscuits, the number of new launches has been the same as last year in biscuits, whereas in the rest of the categories, it's almost twice. So what happens is when you go out of home and start consuming something in terms of food, first of all, you tend to be highly experimentative. So to that extent, you are willing to try the new launches, and that to some extent finds you growth. And if that experimental attempt at or tasting something tends to interest you, it finds its way home. And when it finds its way into in-home consumption, it stays. So that seems to be the route. So it again underscores the importance of new launches and the interesting the consumer in terms of innovation. So that's what that out-of-home deck seems to talk fully about.
Right. And, I mean, there are many categories that you study. There's foods, home care, health and beauty, beverages, and dairy. Anything that's standing out in the last year in terms of either consumption trends or, I mean, I think you've already pointed out, for example, that new launches have driven a lot of the new consumption in areas like out of home. But what stands out across these categories?
So across these categories, one thing that I would definitely call out is the higher degree of individualization in choice. I mean, there was a household purchase, right? Household purchase is still very big, but a lot of individual choices are finding their way. This is reflected in the number of soap brands that is bought by a household in a year, or the number of, like, if when it comes to toilet bathroom cleaners, there's one household purchase, but that doesn't seem to reflect in personal care. There seems to be a larger, wider, individualist variety of choice. And similarly, reflects in snacking, that reflects in the food products as well. So that is one definite change that one is able to see.
Okay. And if I were to now come back to the macro view, but it's actually a micro view in some ways about what's changed really with the consumer in the last year, because I mean you alluded to it. There are a lot of data points. There is messaging from the big consumer product companies. There is of course the smaller guys. There's the e-commerce guys who are showing data of other kinds of trends. So what is this if you were to visualize in a marketing sense that consumer? Who is he, and what has he or she been up to in the last year?
So much like the marketer who's kind of seeing a deluge of data from multiple sources and wondering what to do with such a lot, same is with the consumer, right? So there is so much of things happening. There is geopolitical happening. There are some, happenstance. There are some stances being taken. So those are things that are inputs that are coming. And then there are times when we are speaking about hyperinflation. There are times when we are talking about inflation easing. What do these mean? What does that mean is another area of confusion. The third being taxation being changed and things like that. And people talk about tariffs. It does not matter or affect individuals' life at all, but the sheer stance that there is a word being spoken like that, and there is uncertainty of wars. All of these are getting into the household. And so therefore, what it's resulting in is a fair degree of caution, saying, when it comes to basics, let me stick to the basics. Let me continue to consume the way I do. If I need to really sharpen and go and share my wallet a little more, I need to see something really sharp and good for me to do that. I mean, if I see that is worthwhile for me to try, I will do that. The other way in which I'll do that is when you make it easier for me to try, which means you give me a smaller pack, you give me an easier way to trial offer and things like that. So either something has to be really sharp and innovative for me to try, or the trial has to be easier for me in terms of pricing. So these are two ways in which people are willing to try. Otherwise, my consumption pattern, I would like to keep it as it is so that I do not know what's going to come to. Yeah.
Interesting. And last question. So, the government has said that it will reduce the goods and services tax on a range of products. Now, that's a proposal at this point. There's a GST council. The states have to agree. But we're looking at some sharp downward revisions, and that is going to pretty much affect almost everything that you cover. So, anything that you can use from experience or history to project what it could be or how it could affect demand?
Yeah, so in terms of demand, it would definitely change the demand for listed companies for sure, right? Because if the GST comes down, hopefully that the drop in GST will get passed on to the consumer in full, which means the difference in pricing between a product offered by a listed or larger company versus what is offered by a local company or an unbranded company, the gap will diminish. If the gap diminish, it definitely benefits these brands and things like that for sure. On the other hand, it is quite possible that if the GST levels are low, it might bring newer players into the GST bracket itself and make it even. But nevertheless, if you look at the larger scheme of things, who's going to gain more definitely will be the bigger and larger players if the GST rates come down, because the level of conversion from unbranded to them or from smaller branded brands to the larger brands is going to be on a slightly higher level if the GST rates come down as promised.
And I mean, and supplement to that, but again, going by history or your experience, do people tend to buy more, and if so, in what categories? Because a lot of what you've said so far is really things that we would consume either ways in different categories. So, what would we really consume more? Maybe food, but what would we really consume more because prices are low? Again, the question is more about the Indian consumer and historically how she or he has behaved.
There's a whole lot of processed foods, a whole lot of personal care products. These are areas where the consumption would definitely be on the increase. But when it comes to staples, like let's say nothing is going to change in atta, nothing is going to change in salt and things like that. But when it comes to some of the personal care products, where the penetration is higher among the higher classes and lower among the mass classes, those are categories in which I would think there will be a change in GST, and that will make a difference of penetration increase among the lower consumers. So therefore, there will be definitely it will impact the personal care. It will definitely impact processed foods and convenience foods in a big way.
Right. Rapki, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Yeah. Thanks, Govind.